And I had never heard that word. I was at that age when I liked learning these new words, especially if they were kind of long. I thought vegetarian. I was like, what's a vegetarian? I was kind of excited. And then she said, well, a vegetarian is, I don't know. I mean, don't worry about it. You're never going to meet one.
Hey, empowered vegan lifers. Ella here with my co-host. Hey, Stephanie.
Hey, Ella. How's it going?
I'm feeling lit.
That's what the kids are saying.
Dude, I feel so stupid saying that because I've never said that before in my life, but I was literally thinking about how I'm feeling right now, and that popped in my head. Is that weird? Is that the right use of that word?
It is. And to piggyback off of that, I would also say not only are you one of the most lit persons I know, you're also very woke.
Well, thank you.
Lit and woke.
Wow.
I know, right?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. Well, now I'm feeling very hip too. No, that's probably not.
No.
You ruined it. Shoot. Oh my gosh. But I really am feeling excited because of this interview that we are sharing today, Stephanie. Man, inspiration. Dr. Will Tuttle.
Oh.
Yes, he wrote The World Peace Diet. And he reminded me so much of my father. Oh. And I did tell him this. So I was like, I wonder if that like offends people if you'd say they remind you of their, of your parents. Is that like not appropriate thing to say? I don't ever know.
Well, being a parent myself, I feel like it's a compliment.
Okay.
But I suppose it depends on what context you're using.
It was very positive. So yeah, and I'm going to, give the bio and everything, but he was a former Zen Buddhist monk.
Amazing.
Yeah. And my dad, for those who don't know, he is Buddhist as well. And he teaches meditation as his volunteer work, one of his many volunteer work that he does to death row inmates, which I just find just amazing. You knew that, didn't you?
I did know that. Yeah.
Very connected.
Absolutely.
So it's a very long interview. I could have kept talking to him for hours, and let me just let you guys know a little bit more about him before we jump into it. So Dr. Will Tuttle, visionary author, educator, and inspirational speaker, is author of the acclaimed Amazon #1 bestseller, The World Peace Diet, published in 16 languages. He has presented widely throughout the world in all 50 states and over 50 countries over the past 40 years, sharing the vegan message in many thousands of lectures, arguably more than anyone in history. A recipient of the Courage of Conscious Award and the Empty Cages Prize, he is also author of Your Inner Islands, The Keys to Intuitive Living, as well as editor of Circles of Compassion, Essays Connecting Issues of Justice, and the newly released Buddhism and Veganism, Essays Connecting Spiritual Awakening and Animal Liberation. Devoted to cultural healing and awakening, he is a former Zen monk and Dharma master in the Zen tradition, and his PhD degree from the University of California, Berkeley, focused on educating intuition and altruism in adults. He has taught college courses in creativity, humanities, religion, and philosophy, and is also a composer and concert pianist. He is noted for his clear and inspiring presentations and is featured in many documentary films, including Cowspiracy, A Prayer for Compassion, Vegan, Everyday Stories, and Hope, What You Eat Matters. Yes, so he, wow, what a biography, right?
Yes. Oh, amazing. I cannot wait for this episode.
I know. I can't wait for everybody here to hear it. Let's get to it. Dr. Tuttle, thank you so much for being here with me.
Great. It's wonderful. Thank you, Ella. And thanks everyone for listening in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to talk to you. You have such an amazing history with all the things that you're doing and just what you're bringing to the vegan movement and social justice movements as a whole. Your book, should we start there? The inspiration of your book, The World Peace Diet. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the inspiration for the World Peace Diet, Ella, was really after being a vegan for about, at that point, I guess it was about 20 years. I kept thinking that someone would write a book that would give the big picture of the whole interconnectedness of all of the issues in our society, and how animal agriculture, our routine mistreatment of animals, basically for food and other products, is actually this invisible spinning fury at the core of our society that everyone pretends not to see. And yet out of that come just an untold litany of devastation and destruction and violence. It's really unnecessary. It's like we're doing this ridiculous thing of growing massive amounts of food that we then feed to these animals and then eat that. And so I thought that someone would write a book that would show how there's a spiritual and psychological and environmental and cultural and psychological and nutritional and economic and political and anthropological and sociological dimension to all this, and how that all weaves together. And I remember talking to my wife, Madeline, about it and saying it'd be great to read that book when it comes out. And years went by, and she said, kind of suggested that, well, Will, if you want to read that book, maybe you'll need to write it yourself, which I did not want to do. I knew it would be a huge amount of work, but I finally got together a book proposal and sent it to Lantern Books. And they said, if you write that book, we will publish it. And so then I spent the next 5 years writing. I'd done a lot of research already. I was already doing a lot of lecturing, and I had been a vegan activist already for about 20 years at that point. Now it's been over 40 years, actually.
Wow.
I've been a vegan activist, but at that point I was so happy. And the main thing, just to finish up that question, is just I felt that someone needed to write a book that would take our routine mistreatment of animals for food, and instead of putting it sort of at the bottom of the list of problems. Like, everybody knows we have a list of problems. We have environmental problems, we have health problems, we have social injustice, and all these different things, right? And on that list somewhere, everyone would agree that human abuse of animals is on that list. That's not a good thing, but for most people, it would be at the bottom of the list. Like, we'll handle everything else. And once we get that all taken care of, then we'll be good to animals. We'll get to that later, but humans are so much more important than they are. So we need to handle our own problems first. And I wanted to create a book and a movement, really, that would honor the basic underlying wisdom and truth that it's really our mistreatment of animals for food that in many cases is the biggest problem we're facing, because not only is it the most suffering by far, I don't think anyone can argue in sheer quantity of misery, the fact that we're killing trillions of animals, I mean, in really horrific ways. I mean, that's a lot of suffering. But that when you look deeply, it's actually the actions and the attitudes required by that are generating all of these other problems, and either directly or within one or two little steps, they're directly causing the problems that we're having, that we're trying to solve unsuccessfully. So unless we understand that and go to the root of these problems, we're actually never going to be successful. And like Einstein said, we're drifting toward unparalleled catastrophe if we don't address these problems. So that's why I wrote the book. And I was so glad that it was met with quite a bit of success. It became a #1 worldwide bestseller in 2010. It's now been translated into 17 languages and published in 17 languages. And this is many countries of the world now. And it was all done by volunteers. Every single translation was done by a volunteer in somewhere, like in Croatia or China or Vietnam or Indonesia or wherever it was, Spain, who wanted to see it done. So it's just kind of on a grassroots level, just started spreading, and people have told me over and over again how glad they are that this book was written. But also, we've been invited to speak in all 50 states, in over 50 countries worldwide. So it's really been great to get a big view of the movement, because we've traveled so much. We've really had a chance to see veg fests all over the world and work with local people and their local customs and vegan restaurants and so forth, which has been very interesting and inspiring as well.
Oh, I bet. What a huge undertaking, though, like to think about, thinking about one injustice, like the animals, which is huge, right? but then all the other injustices and how they're all related, and putting that into a format that people can understand, and also presenting it in such a positive light, because it's so easy nowadays, right, to kind of get really down and depressed about what's going on. How do you keep this message so positive?
Yeah, well, the message is enormously positive. I mean, that's the good thing. I mean, the underlying message is the most positive message you can imagine, which is that all human beings, all of us, have been given this wonderful gift. We've been given the gift of a physical body that does not require any animals to suffer, to get all the nutrients that we need to thrive and just have a wonderful time on this beautiful earth and celebrate our lives here. So that underlying basic truth is something to celebrate and be happy about. It's a wonderful thing. You know, we could feed, and what goes along with that is that we could feed everyone on this earth on a fraction of the land, fraction of the water, a fraction of the pollution, a fraction of the petroleum. You know, we could really easily transform our society and our way of looking at things, and we could become much more healthy physically, environmentally, culturally, socially, I think also even psychologically and spiritually, as we transition and move in that direction. So for me, it's always been about this beautiful beckoning doorway that's wide open. There's nothing stopping us as individuals or as a society from moving toward that and running toward it, or whatever, marching or dancing or something, you know, moving toward that doorway. And that doorway opens into a really beautiful, positive future. So that's in a sense, I think that's the frustration, because I can see it so clearly. And yet when I talk about this to people, instead of them going, great, let's do it, come on, and let's go, everybody, let's just make it happen. We can feed everyone on a fraction of the resources. We can be healthy. Like, I mean, I demonstrate myself. I haven't been to a doctor since I don't know when, since like 40 or 50 years. I haven't gone to a drugstore. It's possible to be very healthy, to have a sense, to be peaceful inside, to have a sense of joy every time we wake up in the morning, a sense of gratitude of being part of a beautiful earth. It's all positive. The thing is, we've got some kind of force within people and within our society that just like breaks, it's like this thing that just wants to stop that momentum from happening. It's not going to be good for the profits of certain corporations. People think that, oh my gosh, but I love the taste of bacon, or whatever it is, like these things that seem so incredibly trivial. And really, I mean, we've got much more important things to think about if we really care about our earth, our children, future generations, hungry people, slaughterhouse workers, indigenous people, wildlife. This whole web of interconnected lives really depends on us recognizing this and moving forward. And it's, in a way, it's a no-brainer. It's so obvious when you just spend a little bit of time studying it. And yet even very highly educated people, very trained people can't see it. They just like, wow, I don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't make sense to me. And so I've wrestled with that for 40 years. That's why I wrote The World Peace Diet, was to address the basic dualism of this beautiful vision, and to contrast it starkly with the tremendous suffering that animals and ecosystems and people go through, and then to explain why we have the difficulties we have making the changes so we can understand it, and then to show the way forward. And I was just at a conference this weekend, and it was great to meet people who said, I read your book and I went vegan. Because if you actually read this, you can't argue with one sentence in the book. So I realized I have no choice but to go vegan. So I think anyone who actually gets the book as a gift from someone will go vegan, unless they just don't read it. I think a lot of people just do that. They just put it on the shelf and think, well, I'll read that later. But actually, I wrote it for people who are already vegan, who need to understand the bigger picture, because a lot of vegans do not understand what veganism is at all. Right. And then a lot of people have a complete misunderstanding of veganism who are not vegan. They think it's some kind of ascetic discipline, or that it's some kind of angry movement of hating people, or people think that it's giving up a lot of wonderful things that you don't want to give up. So to just try to dispel the myths and to show the path that we have to walk, and to reveal veganism not as a goal, but as a practice. It's not a goal, it's a practice. It's an everyday practice, and we can always improve. I still feel like I'm improving at being a vegan. Even I've been a vegan, say 41 years, but I could always be better, because it has to do with our relationship, our living moment to moment relationship, not only with the people that are close to us, but really with everything we're doing in our life. It's actually connected to this. It's love. Veganism is love in action. It's actually not just theoretically saying, "Oh, I'm a very loving person. I just like a good burger and a milkshake." I'm actually doing the best I can to extend the sense of loving kindness to those who are vulnerable. And so it's a sense of radical inclusion, of including all living beings within the sphere of my kindness and concern, not just certain ones, my tribe, my species, my family, myself. I mean, even if we don't, the funny thing is, even if we don't care about anybody else outside of us, even if we actually don't care about people of other races, other tribes, other whatever it is, genders, if we just only care about ourselves, we better go vegan.
Right.
Because really, it's just so much suffering we cause to ourselves if we're not understanding these ideas. So, and it goes out from there, basically. Yeah.
This is so amazing. I've got chills all over my body right now. So one thing our audience is very familiar with, we talk about programming a lot, mental programming. And I know that's something that you talk about in the indoctrination. What happened 41 years ago that allow you to reprogram or to challenge that program that we're all born into?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I think the program that I was born into was very deep. It was in me deeply. I really did not go vegan at a young age, or even vegetarian. I was born and raised in Concord, Massachusetts, back in the 1950s, and I was born and raised eating the usual meals, lots of meat, dairy products, and eggs. When I was about 7 years old, I asked my mother about it, and I said, "Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this pretty typical of what everybody's eating?" And I was starting to think about it, I guess. And she thought for a minute, and she said, yeah, this is pretty much what everybody's eating. We're eating pretty much the same as everybody else. And then she left. But then she came back minutes later. I still remember it. She said, "Actually, there are vegetarians." And I had never heard that. Was at that age when I liked learning these new words, especially if they were kind of long. I thought vegetarian. I was like, what's a vegetarian? I was kind of excited. And then she said, "Well, a vegetarian is, I don't know. I mean, don't worry about it. You're never going to meet one." And she said, I never met one. I don't know where they get their protein. In my young mind, I was just convinced from hearing my mother talk about this, that these vegetarians must be not only very rare because she had never met one, and she was much older than I was, and also that they were probably very unhappy and unhealthy because they weren't getting enough protein. So I was so glad I wasn't a vegetarian. I thought, that's really great. I'm glad I'm eating the right food here. So that was kind of how I was raised. Older to a summer camp in Vermont, where I, for several years as a young teenager, I would participate in killing chickens, and we would kind of learn how to do these things. And so that even cemented it, I think, more deeply. I thought, gosh, I'm a man, I can kill my own chickens. And we would actually, every year we would kill a dairy cow. That was part of the program and learning about life. And so I didn't like it, but I had gone through at that point probably about 13 or 14 years of the most intense indoctrination a human being can possibly go through. And I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is what we have to do. We have to eat these animals that God gave them to us to eat. They don't have a soul. They taste good. If we don't eat them, we're definitely going to die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. And so I just, participated in all those things. When I went away to college in 1971, so I was just at that age, I was about 18. I remember hearing there were some vegetarians on campus, but I never met one. And then my mother said, "You'll never meet one." But then with the Vietnam War and starting to question things, basically, I started to really question things and the war machine and all these different things. And so right after college, my brother and I left home, and we decided we were going to walk to California on kind of a spiritual pilgrimage to just decide what we wanted to do with our life. So that was in 1975. And on that walk, we walked to Buffalo. Buffalo. It took a few months. And then in Buffalo, we walked south and we walked all the way to Alabama. And on the way on this walk, we were just walking little back roads and meditating. And it was quite an adventure. But I remember when we got into Tennessee, we heard about the farm, which was the largest hippie commune in the world back then. And it was about 900 people, and they were all vegetarians. And so we went there, and it was amazing. I mean, we saw 900 people, and they were actually vegans because they weren't eating any animal foods of any kind, no meat, dairy, or eggs, but no one knew the word vegan back then. So, so basically, I asked them, why are you guys vegetarians? And they told me a little bit about the wastefulness of animal agriculture, how people were starving because we're feeding all these foods to animals. And they also talked about the cruelty to the animals. So that was it. I became a vegetarian on the spot in 1975. And then a few years later, in 1980, I realized more deeply and clearly the cruelty to dairy cows and hens. So I became a vegan in 1980. And I think in a way, for me, it's similar to a lot of people, whereas vegetarianism is often very kind of clear-cut choice. It's kind of thing to give up meat, animal flesh. Vegan is a little more complicated very often because it means dairy, eggs, wool, silk, leather, it's this whole package of just not harming animals, doing the best we can to minimize our suffering to animals. So vegan is much broader, it's much bigger. And for me, it was a little bit more of a team. I did it over about a year period, giving up all these other things.
Wow. You went vegan in my birth year, by the way.
Oh, really? In 1980?
Yeah, I was born in 1980. Yep.
Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah. So it's been a good 41 years, hasn't it?
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Oh, I love it. Okay. So then you also have, you call yourself also a peace activist. And I heard about the fact that you're also a former Zen monk. Is that true?
Yeah, right. So in my early 20s, when I left home and lived in these different communities, I lived in the farm and then ended up walking farther south to Alabama and living in a Zen Buddhist monastery, actually Zen Buddhist center, I should say, really. It wasn't really a monastery, but it was a center in Huntsville, Alabama, and then in a meditation center in Atlanta. And then I got out to California. I lived in a Tibetan Buddhist meditation center in San Francisco, and then a Korean Buddhist meditation center in Oakland. And then I shaved my head and became a Zen Buddhist monk in South Korea. So I spent about 10 years just living in meditation centers and monasteries, focusing on meditation, focusing on spiritual practice, doing lots of long retreats, sitting in silence for thousands of hours in meditation, reading books about spirituality from a variety of perspectives. But I was very interested in the Buddhist teaching, especially Hindu, Jain, Taoist, as well as a lot of contemplative Christian. We're also, I've always been interested, I guess, since I started waking up in college, about the spiritual path, because I think essentially at its core is about spirituality. It's about questioning materialism. Materialism is, I think, the main problem in our society, and it's propagated by animal agriculture because animals are bought and sold by the pound. It's this gross materialism where we just look at a being as a thing, right? That's materialism. You see a being who's looking out of her eyes at us. Instead of seeing a being, we see an object that we're going to sell for $3 a pound or whatever, or buy for $3 a pound. That takes an absolute deadening of the spiritual impulse in a human being to do that. I mean, you cannot have any real sense of spiritual awareness to be so grossly materialistic. To me, it's almost inconceivable that we human beings have allowed ourselves to tolerate a society that's doing this billions of times a day and like it's normal. to convert living beings into commodities that are like sacks of cement or rocks or concrete or like just objects that you throw around like they have no interest at all. And anyone who has a companion animal knows in his or her bones that these are not objects. These are beings who have interests that are as important to them as my interests are to me. So for me, the spiritual path really started and was always going along with my veganism. They went together. When I was on the road with my brother walking on that pilgrimage, I was starting to really question eating meat already before I got to the farm. I remember going and fishing. We were really hungry. And this guy said, you can stay in my cabin for a few days. And he had some fishing poles and we had no food. And I remember going out and catching a couple of fish. And then I had to kill them before we could eat them. And I said, this is it. This is ridiculous. And here we are praying for peace, meditating, trying to connect with harmony. And I'm ripping these poor animals out of their natural habitat, slamming them on the floor, killing them, cutting them up. That's totally contradictory. So when the people at the farm demonstrated to me, they had 200 children that were vegan from birth. I mean, they were thriving. They were not dragging themselves to the dirt. They were so healthy. It became so obvious. This is fantastic. We don't have to harm animals. We can grow our own food. And growing food is a spiritual thing, really. Yeah. You plant one seed, you get hundreds of seeds. You get an abundance. It's a beautiful working with nature and so forth. But the problem today is that we do plant agriculture the same way we do animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is always based on domination and exploitation and oppression of nature and of animals and of the sacred feminine dimension of life. And so it's men's work, basically, of harming other beings and killing them and sexually abusing them. It brings out the worst in us. And so now we, unfortunately, since our whole society is based on animal agriculture, we do plant agriculture the same way. And we use genetically engineered seeds, and we use pesticides and herbicides and fungi. Or with nature, we're dominating, we're monocropping, we're cutting down forests to grow more crops and just disturbing the ecosystems and not seeing the beauty around us and working in harmony with that. So that's animal agriculture's way. We've taken it into our bodies because we're eating it every day and we feed it to our children. So it's essential that we make these connections and understand the price that we pay for this. It's the price that we pay is enormous. Our happiness, our health, the possibility of living intelligently on this earth. We pay that price by eating animal-based foods and we don't realize it. That's the tragedy, actually.
Yeah. And what's the worldwide prayer circle for animals?
Yeah, and that goes along with it. So we decided at one point to encourage people to pray every day or to meditate every day for not only world peace, but for compassion. I had this idea and I told my wife, Madeline, and Judy Carmen, who's also a longtime vegan activist, and we decided to create the Circle of Compassion, it's called. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. But one of the main projects we do is the Worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals, where anyone, wherever you happen in the world at noon, we stop for a minute and we just say the prayer that we compose. It's very simple, which is, compassion encircles the earth for all beings. We just say that. We say, compassion encircles the earth for all beings everywhere. And that's the basic idea, is to create a field of conscious awareness on planet Earth that people can linking up and affirming this truth that we are is a field of awareness. We look out of our eyes, we see the world, and it's through our awareness that we perceive reality. And so we can cultivate an awareness that's filled with the light of kindness and respect for other beings, and then affirm that and every day remind ourselves and then build that field around the earth. And so one of the practices I think that's great to do as a vegan is not merely to refrain from buying meat, dairy products and eggs and so forth, but to also share these ideas with other people, and then also to actively radiate loving kindness to other people and other animals. So if I'm driving the car and I see another person cutting in front of me, instead of sending them hatred and anger that they cut in front of me, I send them some love, right? Send them some kindness and goodwill. And if I see some birds flying, I send them just send them love. The idea is to just radiate love, have a feeling of love for all other expressions of life, solidarity with them, wishing them well, and a sense of, but now everyone doesn't know what their anything, what their race is, gender is, age is, species is, it doesn't matter. None of that. You look beyond all the outer appearances and see the being and honor the being. And I think that's the key to real world peace. It starts with each individual. The power really is with the individual to cultivate that in ourselves. And then the power is also with the community, because the community really influences the individual enormously. So all of us, I think, are wounded by being raised in a society organized around animal agriculture that emphasizes our differences from each other, our differences from animals. Some are superior to others. This whole cultural narrative it's a program, like you say, it's an indoctrination that we're born into. And veganism is, to me, far more than merely not eating animals. It's actively questioning all of this kind of indoctrination and replacing it with something based in truth, that's based in health, that's based in unity, and based in loving kindness and respect for other expressions of life. And it makes our life so much more happy and healthy. Also, I think it connects us with our creativity, because instead of trying to destroy things, we're trying to create an alternative. And that's what I love about veganism, is we're not just criticizing a system that's harmful and obsolete and getting angry at all these terrible corporations and terrible people eating meat or anything like that. We are actually creating a positive alternative and growing foods that are healthy and eating foods that are healthy and sharing the ideas and having festivals and creating art and music and podcasts like you're doing, and being healthy, celebrating the tremendous health of body and mind and society that are possible for us when we question that program.
So good. And I know you talk about the benevolent revolution. That sounds,
right.
Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's it. Veganism is a revolution. Veganism is an evolution, perhaps, is an even a better word. It's a moving onward, a revolving, or I love the word adventure. It's really seeing our human life as an adventure, and our culture is also on an adventure, right? We're learning, and so it's based on benevolence. It's based on actually realizing that in our heart, when we look out of our eyes with our natural human eyes, we naturally feel a sense of kinship and benevolence for other expressions of life, for the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the trees and the flowers and the sky and the clouds and the moon and the sun and the rain. It's all spectacularly beautiful. It's incredibly intelligent. It works in ways together that we in our science have not even begun to scratch the surface of understanding. And it's far more wise and beautiful, I think, than we even begin to understand. I've done a lot of very, what's the word? I guess I spent a lot of time in spiritual practices that, in a sense, allowed me to stop my thinking process and to see directly. And so I've had experiences where I've left my body, for example. After spending many weeks all alone in a little cabin in Oregon, and I was up, but I was looking down, myself walking. We are not our bodies. We have to understand that. I know, because I experienced it. Consciousness is diluted into thinking that it's confined in this prison that was born and will die. That's not it. It's a vehicle for consciousness. Our physical body is a vehicle. It's not. And so our culture teaches us we're supposed to identify with the vehicle, which is absurd. It's like if you leave a footprint on the beach and you look at the footprint and say, well, that's me. Don't anybody touch my footprint. That's me right there. Leave it alone. It's a beautiful footprint there. You can realize when we see another person or we see an animal, we're seeing a footprint. We can't see the being that's making it. That's consciousness. That's awareness. And that's eternal. So through lots of meditation and practices of all kinds, it's possible for consciousness to mature in a way where we realize these things, not just intellectually, but actually understand them. And then our heart fills with compassion automatically, because we really are. I mean, people are lost in the delusion of materialism and think they're just an object. And they try to manipulate other people as objects and get what they want and get rich or get a mate or get a car or a house. I mean, they don't realize that we're only here for a few decades, and we're not here to accumulate stuff. We're here to awaken to the truth that we are, and then to serve and bless others in the movement of awakening, and to find our own unique way to contribute to the awakening of our species. Really, I think our humanity needs to wake up. So we're only going to do that, I think, when we question all of the official narratives and then do the inner work, which is difficult to do, really, to sit and time every single day practice listening. And I think I was very blessed to have a father who was a pianist, and he could play beautiful music. He would sit at the piano and just play, and he would do that every day when he came home from work. And so I grew up wanting to play the piano like him. I was the oldest child, and he started teaching me, and he said, you can do what I'm doing, but you got to practice. That's the thing. We got to practice. And so I grew up with this idea that practice is everything. Whatever we practice, we're going to get good at. So we're raised in a society where we practice the wrong things. We practice materialism. We practice disconnecting. We practice stealing the purposes of other beings. We practice hardening our hearts to the suffering of others. So we become experts at that. We can do that so well. We can walk down the street and just look at everybody like they're just a cardboard figure and not care about them. We practice that so we get good at it. If we practice the opposite of that, if we practice looking with love at other beings, if we practice taking time every day, take a half an hour or an hour and just sit quietly and listen to your own breathing and to the question of what am I actually? What is it that is vivifying this physical body? There's a being that is going to be with you when you leave this body, right? I mean, there's something more than just this. And when we actually do these practices, we can discover this firsthand, not secondhand, but firsthand. And then it's real. And that, I think, if our vegan movement can mature in this way, spiritually and psychologically and emotionally, and intellectually, so that we actually understand in a more profound way who we actually are and what animals actually are, then I think our movement will grow so fast. Because instead of trying to manipulate other people and shame them and criticize them and try to get them to do something, or try to change systems from the outside, we begin to become, like Gandhi said, he understood this, become the change we want to see in the world, become the loving, aware, celebratory expression of life that is what veganism is actually pointing to. As our whole movement does it, then we'll start to attract so many more people, and it'll become obvious. We won't have to fight against an obsolete system. We'll be creating the positive future that we want to see for our children. And I think that's something that everyone can actually do. We can do it by practicing. And for me, the idea is that we have an instrument. I remember when we were looking for an instrument, a piano, and I looked all over the entire San Francisco Bay Area to find the very best piano in the entire, Northern California. I wanted the best piano, and because I was going to play on it and I was going to record on it. And we looked everywhere, and we finally found this beautiful piano in San Jose, and we had it shipped up into where, and it was something, I couldn't afford it, but we started renting it, and eventually I could get it. And so, but the idea was that each one of us is beautiful, precious instrument, like a beautiful piano, for example. But if we've never been taught how to play the piano, and we have this magnificent instrument, our body and our mind, but we've never been properly trained on how to use it, what do we do? Now, you've heard people go up on a piano, or little kids, and they start banging on the keys and, like, stop, you're making such terrible music. They knew what they were doing. They could make beautiful music, but they don't know how. And so that's what I see happening. It's like people have these beautiful instruments, beautiful physical bodies, beautiful potential through their eyes and ears and nose and senses and creative ability. And yet we're never taught how to quiet our mind, how to focus our attention, how to bring about the most beautiful thoughts and feelings, the most delicate and sensitive expressions of words and movement and dance and music and art. But each one of us could do that. We're not taught to do that. We're taught the opposite. We're pretty much taught to pollute the body and to be kind of hard and coarse and disconnected. And it's not our fault. It's just the wounding that we've received. So the good news, essentially, again, is whatever's happened in the past, right now, this present moment is the point of power for each one of us, every moment of our life, to do the best we can right now, that our physical instrument, that we have for a few decades while we're here, that we build it with the most clean, healthy, beautiful foods, that we allow the most beautiful, truthful, authentic words to be spoken, that we have our gestures and our lives be, as best we can, an expression of healing and liberation for other living beings. That's really the promise, I think, before we came here, to do that. But once we get here, we are forced in a way to forget all that and just try to compete and get along and so forth. So we fall under the sway of a very toxic program, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And so now I think we're seeing more and more people realize this. And I think it's a wonderful time to be alive, because we can see a lot of things kind of collapsing, a lot of behaviors that are no longer really healthy are becoming more obvious. And I think each one of us is really now more than ever in a position to help bring a positive change in our world that's so urgently needed at this time. And it's a vegan revolution, a benevolent revolution of kindness and compassion for those who are vulnerable, especially for those who are vulnerable, to be especially kind of.
This is so beautiful. I have to say, I hope you don't mind, but you remind me a lot of my father. I hope that doesn't offend you, but
no, not at all.
Yeah, no, he's Buddhist as well, and did the whole across the country in the communes, and wow. Yeah, he does teaches meditation to inmates on death row, and I feel so fortunate to have him as a father. And it's awesome that your mom, I mean, just going back to that for a moment, was able to come back and offer that vegetarian, plant that seed, even though she was like, you're never going to meet one. That was, it seemed like that little thing was a seed for you, it seems.
It was a seed. And it's beautiful because many years later, my mother read my book, The World Peace Diet. She actually read it before I wrote it. I was sending her some draft copies, and she went vegan. By that point, she was probably in her late 60s, early 70s. And now she's 94 and she's still a vegan. And she's doing great. I mean, considering she's that old. And she's living with my sister, who was also, and it was kind of tough for them because they were both fundamentalist Christians in their church. Were very suspicious of this kind of stuff, but they both are vegans. Wow. And longtime vegans now. And my sister has a daughter who also went vegan, and my daughter now has 4 children, and they're all vegan from birth. And we have this beautiful 4 generations of vegans in our family. My mother and me and my sister, and then my brother's pretty much vegan. He's in Ecuador. He leads shamanic retreats down in Ecuador.
Oh my gosh!
And then my sister, my sister's daughter and all her kids, and there's a lot of vegan. We got together about, I guess, 20 or 25 of us, the family, and we were all vegan. It was great. So it was just but it took me about 15 or 20 years. A lot of people say, well, how do you get your family to go vegan? Just be patient.
Yes.
It takes time. Plant the seeds, and it may or may not happen, but it may take time. And that's the most important thing, is to just plant the seeds.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And for me, it was also my mother who let me know when I said, this guy, Daniel Boone, we learned about him in school. I was 7 years old. And I said, he was so mean. He shot animals. And she was just honest. She's like, we get our meat from the grocery store. We're very lucky we don't have to do that ourselves anymore. And just,
right.
That was it. I never ate meat again. And just like you, just by embodying that belief and living and being that compassionate human being, they've all gone vegan too. And my sister has 3 kids and vegan from birth and all of that. So it really does. It takes patience, and that can be really tough. And that's a whole nother, we could go into that as well. But I do want to get to the upcoming summit. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, even though that's going to come and pass following the publishing of this podcast, but all the message is the same. And this is, your work, your life's work. So I'd love, can you talk a little bit about the summit?
Sure. Yeah. So the summit is called the Worldwide Vegan Summit for Truth and Freedom. And it's the idea that I had to create a forum, basically like an online forum, a summit. We have 16 people who are all well-known in the vegan community. They're leaders in the vegan community. And they're also outspoken advocates of health freedom, which I think is especially important during these times. Because one of the things I've realized over the years is that the pharmaceutical industry is one of the biggest enemies that veganism has, because they make so much money selling over 10,000 different drugs and hormones and antibiotics and so forth and chemicals to be used on the cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and ducks and geese and other animals that are eaten. So these animals are all drugged terribly, and then people eat that food and get sick, and so they make more money there. And then people have the psychological problems of depression and anxiety, and they're eating animals who are, of course, have tremendous amount of depression and anxiety. And so I think there's an effect there. So the pharmaceutical industry, in my experience, is actually even more against veganism than even the meat, dairy, and egg industries, which are actually, people have to eat, so they're investing a lot in plant-based foods. So, but the pharmaceutical industry really needs sick people, and it's based on, really in many ways, on poisoning ecosystems. It's part of the chemical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is part of the chemical industry, which to me is not a good force on the planet. It's a lot of toxicity that is happening. So this summit is really to try to help vegans remember and get back to the roots of questioning the official narratives in our society about health, about freedom, because I've been seeing a lot of our basic freedoms being taken away, and we can't really advocate for animals if we speech, if we don't have freedom of assembly, if we don't have these basic freedoms. So the people, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Dr. Joel Kahn, Dr. Brian Clement, Dr. Gabriel Cousins, Dr. Pam Popper, Dr. Almighty May, Hannah Maria, Claire Mann, Derek Brose, Karen Ramsey. There's quite a few well-known vegans who are also doing their best to promote health freedom. And so I thought it'd be interesting and very helpful to let their message come through more clearly, so that we can stay healthy ourselves, not only physically during these times that are kind of challenging, but also socially, to have a more healthy society, because the animals that we are dominating and exploiting, they are experiencing the loss of their sovereignty. And we as human beings, it's essential for us not to lose our sovereignty, because if we lose our sovereignty, then we won't be able to help others. So I think it's very important for us to speak up and to talk about these various issues in a loving way that helps people to think critically about the issues and understand what I understand. Because my father, it's so interesting, my father was actually wanted to be a doctor. And so he was a medic in World War II in France. He went over to the war. He was over there. And he was dealing with the war injuries, but mostly what he was doing, he said, was he was giving people shots. He was just giving people shots all the time. That's what he did. And he just didn't like it. He said, I don't think those shots were helping people. And so he gave up being a doctor. And he always said to us, actually, when I was a kid growing up, he said, whatever you do, try not to go to doctors too much. Try to stay away from doctors. You'll be a lot better off, actually. And I followed that advice. I just knew, I guess, myself. So I've done that. I pretty much have taken responsibility for my own health. So because I could see that all of us are taught from the time we're little kids that if we have a runny nose or if we have a cough or a rash or whatever, we run to the drugstore and we get an aspirin or Tylenol or a Viagra or Right Guard or some ointment or whatever. And I never wanted to do that. I wanted to just heal it within my own, what am I eating? How am I living? Am I exercising? And what is it? And get to the deeper level. And it's worked really well for me. I've been able to stay out of that whole system for the last 50 years. And, but what he did instead of being a doctor was he became a newspaper publisher. I grew up in the media. I grew up in the swirling world of newspaper publishing and all the meetings and all the advertising. And so I learned that the media is completely controlled by the advertisers. I could say it sometimes. We can't run an article on that because so-and-so advertiser wouldn't like it. They pull their ads, we'll go out of business. You can't do that. You got to please the advertisers. And so that has liberated me. I have not had a television. Some people say, how are you so healthy? I say, because I gave up TV. I haven't had a television for 50 years. I haven't had it since way back in 1971 or whatever it was. So I think television and media in general is indoctrinating people with a message that is not in our best interest. It's a message that's very pro-animal agriculture. It's pro-pharmaceutical industry. It's really against our best interests. So disconnecting from the mainstream media and instead of that, paying attention to alternative media, like what you're doing with your Sexy Fit Vegan program, I think that is so healthy because that's how we really learn. That's the real media right now, is people creating conversations that are empowering and liberating and not just imprisoning us.
This is amazing. Dr. Tuttle, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing such a positive force to this movement and this world. We just need so much more of that positivity, especially in today's day and age where it's easy to get down. And you just bring such light and such hope and give people a plan of action as well. And so I'm really excited for the summit. I'm excited for all our audience to get on board. We will put all the links in the show notes to your book, to the summit, to all the websites that you have and all the projects you're doing, because you're doing such amazing work. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ella. And thank you, everyone. Let's go forth and multiply the message in the world. Like you say, it's a message that really it's the opposite of fear. It's a message of joy and celebration, of kindness and love, of compassion, of inclusion, and of relishing and savoring this wonderful opportunity of a human life, this great adventure that we can grow and co-create together a world of love and peace and harmony that includes everyone, all expressions of life. And each one of us can contribute our unique piece to this puzzle. And when we do that, when we get to the end of our life, we leave this vehicle, which we all will do, we will give thanks that we had this opportunity and that we lived our life authentically. That's the most important thing. And I think as long as we're doing that, we'll have a sense of joy in our heart and we'll have a sense of gratitude every morning when we wake up for another day. And that's what I wish for everyone, that we all do our best to unfold the unique, beautiful flower that we are in this garden on this beautiful planet. Thank you very much, Ella. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you.